Welcome back, everyone, to the Comic Blast podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Grayson, and along with me is the number one Spider-Man PS4 fanboy coming back at you, holding
Yeah.
his mic in an archaic way because his mic stand broke. Keenan.
Yeah. I'm so happy that you refer to me as the number one Spider-Man PS4 fan because I've been working hard to earn that title. So,
Yeah, it's
uh,
true.
and I got a PlayStation 4. I know we talked about it on the last episode, but I have a
hmm
PS4. I can finally start playing it again. It's been great.
Yeah, I have also been playing it, which has been fantastic. Was actually playing it for the past couple hours before this episode, before I actually stopped and watched Spider-Man 3, and then came back and kept playing for the last
Heck
hour
yeah.
before this episode. And that's exactly what we're talking about is Spider-Man 3. Continuing our Spider-Man in review series.
Highly requested.
Yes, people I have been now seeing the love that people are like very excited for the Spider-Man 3 episode. Um so you can go and if you haven't caught up, you can go and check out our Spider-Man 1 and 2 review.
Yeah.
Um but now we doing Spider-Man 3, baby. Um I we used to have some sort of like we normally have like a formula, but I know we're just gonna end up going into a rant. Just give me your initial thoughts after rewatching Spider-Man 3. Give me your
Spider-Man
story.
3. Spider-Man 3 is like I was thinking about this. I had this whole thing planned out on my way home. Spider-Man 3 is the trail mix of superhero movies.
The
You,
trail mix.
the
Just
trail mix
explain that.
it is a mixed bag. So you have you have the good things, Chex Mix, the pretzels, stuff you like. And then every
hmm
now and then you got people who like to throw raisins in there or something disgusting like that. Shout
I
out
love
to
the
all my
raisin.
raisin haters. But yeah, I mean, you got it's a mixed bag. I mean, it's got some good, it's got some very bad and unfortunate scenes in the
hmm
film, but overall, I still enjoy it. Like every time when I watch it, I'm never, mad that I watched it. But I
Yeah.
remember like as a kid growing up, but not liking the movie,
Yeah.
in originally. So I mean, you gotta figure like you're coming off Spider-Man 2, which is arguably one of the best superhero movies of all time, and then you have this terrible production and a lot of issues filming this film, and then you get Spider-Man 3. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it is the epitome of studio interference and a lack of the director's original vision, and it's
Yeah.
it's sad. Like, it's a sad thing too.
Yeah. It's where it started with Sony's tampering in the whole Spider-Man universe was with this movie specifically, like Avi Arad trying to force in Venom and the symbiote when Sam Raimi just wanted Sandman.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I guess it's a good way to put it. I think. See, when you said that, I thought the Amazing Spider-Man 2, but we'll get to that at a
sure.
later date because I think that even that shows even more about the studio tampering
Yeah,
there. Spider-Man 3 was was the start. Um, so Spider-Man 3 was probably is I still say is my most anticipated or was my most anticipated movie of all time.
yeah,
As a kid, I refreshed the website for this page, like or the website for this movie every day. I played all the mini games on the website. Like I looked at all the promotional images and stuff like that. A lot of the stuff that like wasn't even in the movie,
yeah.
um, because I was so hyped for the black suit and I was so hyped for Venom and like new Spider-Man movie. Like I remember, I was obsessed with this movie, and I mean I even have probably one of my favorite shots in any Spider-Man movie ever. But I have the original Spider-Man 3 poster where it's
Yeah.
him in the black suit on the church, like the church gargoyle,
Yep.
and it's raining. Dude,
Sick.
I just think that scene right there, like it is so good.
Yeah.
It is so well done. That shot right there, I'm like that. Like the music and everything, man, perfection. But so I grew up and I loved the movie when it came out. The only thing that I was disappointed with was I was like I wanted more Venom.
Yeah.
Because I was a kid. Avi Arad was right. I wanted Venom toys.
Yeah.
So so clearly something was working there. And then as I got older, people were like, "Oh, Spider-Man 3 sucks." I got on social media and they were like, "Spider-Man 3 is trash," and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, is it really?" and then they make fun of like the scenes, which I never even really like batted an eye when I watched it as a kid, and I'm like, oh, okay, I see what they're talking about now. And then
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, Spider-Man 3 is like my least favorite Spider-Man movie for sure. But now that's not the case at all.
No.
Now I'm like, I defend Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
Is it the worst out of this trilogy? Yes. If Spider-Man 1, in my opinion, is a 9 out of 10, and Spider-Man 2 is a 10 out of 10, this is an 8 out of 10.
Oh wow.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like this movie, it suffers from a few plot points. The fact that Sony tampered with it as much as they did, and Sam Raimi, for the most part, managed to make actually a pretty good movie is pretty impressive. Like, there was a lot in here, and it's still paced very well. I never get confused. Like, I never got confused when watching the movie about all the plot points. Like, there's a lot in the movie, but it never feels overwhelming. They develop all the characters very well. Even Eddie Brock, who I think is a chump in this movie, they still give me a reason to be like, oh, yeah, okay. Like, they give me a decent rivalry. They set it from the beginning and the end. Same thing with Sandman. Same thing with Harry.
Mm-hmm.
Like, all the villains, they feel earned. And I have an emotional attachment to every single one of them other than Eddie Brock, who I'm just like, yeah, you're a chump. See you, chump.
Yeah. No, yeah. Like, I agree with... I disagree with the Eddie Brock point, because it just... There's more potential there. I think that like they kind of laid a foundation where like you could see where they were going, and that should have been fleshed out in its own film.
I was about to say that should have been teased and then set up for a future film.
Like, if they wanted to, the thing is, like, if we're being honest, Sam Raimi didn't ever want to do anything with Venom. He made it very clear, I don't know much about the character, and I don't care much about the character to actually, put him in his films, and I understand that. If that were the case, Sony should have just, went with somebody else for that, maybe at a later film. The thing is, the rivalry thing is a really cool thing to play on between Eddie Brock and Peter Parker, and that alone could have had its own film, I think.
Yeah.
The points about Sandman and personally my favorite like character arc and plot line is the one with Harry and Peter. Those ones are definitely Sam Raimi, and they didn't feel as forced, and they're more emotional, especially when it comes to the ending of this film. So those are the ones I love. Like you said, it's an 8 out of 10 for you. I'd probably have it lower, like 6.5 out of 10, but it could be like an 8 or 9 out of 10 if they just removed the Eddie Brock and Venom storyline, because it didn't really need to be in there. And you can have Peter Parker be a jerk and egotistical without having the symbiote, I think. Because he was already kind of like teetering towards that direction early on in the film before the symbiote just kind of enhanced where he was, mentally at that point in time. So I think that if that were removed, and really if they just, I honestly believe Sam Raimi wanted this film to be about the three main characters, MJ, Peter, and Harry. If they just stuck with that and just played on that a little bit more, we could have got an amazing finale for this trilogy. That being said, I still enjoy the movie, and it does not, it has some of the best Spider-Man moments in a film. For example, the part where Spider-Man goes to rescue Gwen from the building. Cool web swinging. It's just like, it feels like it's kind of ripped out of a cutscene from Spider-Man PS4.
Yeah.
But the part where he's diving down to get Gwen, and then the music just kind of stops and it's silence, and you just get these sound effects as he's trying to race down there to rescue her. That's like, it's one of my favorite moments. Like, I cannot wait for that to pop up in the film.
Yeah.
So
there's specific scenes like that. One of our patrons, again, I mention him all the time. He's like a fellow Spider Bro, and as I call him, and I was like sending him Snapchats and stuff during the movie, and being like, this scene is so good. For example, the train fight scene between Sandman and Black Suit Spider-Man. Yeah. I love that fight scene. Yep. It's so well done. Like, this trilogy just has great fight scenes, especially in 2 and 3. I think 1 maybe lesser so, but there's still Still really good.
Yeah.
But I want to make, maybe I think this will be where we start to have disagreements. I think the black suit is essential for this movie, but I don't think Venom is essential. I think I think the black suit is the catalyst for Peter realizing the like the mistakes that he's making. Like that was kind of the point of the black suit, is like Peter is a good person, but he's starting to let the ego and the popularity get to his head, you know?
Yeah.
And he's not being there for MJ, and he thinks he's ready to be married to her and stuff like that. But there's a specific dialogue. It's after he takes off the black suit, and it's a moment that I honestly completely forgot about until I rewatched it this time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when Aunt May comes to visit his apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and towards the very end of the movie, he takes off the black suit, and he apparently called her, and she shows up, and he gives her back the ring. He's like, "I'm not ready." Like he said, he quotes her saying that a man has to put his wife before himself, and he's like, "I'm not ready for that."
I
And
don't remember that well.
yeah,
I'm wondering if is there like an editor's cut or something of this film? There's different versions.
I watched the theatrical cut,
Okay.
so
I think I watched the editor's cut, and I'm not sure if
okay,
that was in there because that's not really ringing a bell for me.
it's
I
a really good scene.
I may have just I may just completely forgot about it.
It's,
But
I mean, that's the thing, is I had forgotten about it too. It's a scene
yeah.
that you don't really think about until, because it's right after it is when Venom is like approaches Sandman, and that's when they team up. But I took there's a quote he says, like, or Aunt May says, he's like, I hurt her, Aunt May, like,
Yeah.
she's like, the first thing you have to do, which is the hardest part, is forgiving yourself.
Mhm.
And rewatching this trilogy has just made me realize, like, Rosemary Harris is the best Aunt May, and
Amen.
probably always will be. She is so freaking good.
Every movie there is like one or two very like we've reviewed each movie leading up, to No Way Home so far. Every time we make a review, we always bring up at least one conversation between Peter and Aunt May and how that emotionally affected us.
Yep.
For every single film so far.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe she is like definitively the best Aunt May. I've already started on The Amazing Spider-Man, and
Yeah.
who's the actress? What's her
Sally
name?
Fields.
Yeah,
She's great.
she's great too. She's great too. There's some good moments too. But Rosemary Harris still alive. I just found out. I thought she had passed, but she's still doing well. So
Yeah, she is still alive. Unfortunately, Cliff Robertson, who played Uncle Ben,
Yeah.
is not. But them two, even as a couple, they set up their relationship a little bit in the first movie,
Mhm.
and you just believe in it.
Yeah.
You believe that these are two good people raising their nephew, well, I like to say their son,
Yeah.
in a really good way. But yeah, so I think the black suit really works for this movie, and it works for the Sandman arc, and it even works for the Harry stuff. But the problem that I have with the black suit is not even just Venom. Like, I can deal with Venom if it wasn't Topher Grace and his design was different. Like he looks like a snake, and I'm like his face does. I like his body, his build.
It's got like
to
this
match.
reptile look.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
it's like its shrieks aren't like
Yeah.
they aren't like classic Venom. It's like high pitched, like shrieking, like, it makes me think, for
God.
Harry Potter people, like, it makes me think of the basilisk which is a gigantic snake. Like, the teeth are very fang like.
It's just like
it's not.
when there's a scene where like the symbiote kind of comes off of Eddie's face and it's just Eddie,
Yeah.
and his teeth are just like disgusting looking and like sharp. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, that's weird.
Yeah, they're like too sharp. That's the one thing, and maybe we'll review this. I don't know. Well, Venom 2 comes out as we'll lead up to this, so maybe we'll watch Venom again. But Venom's design in those movies, if they had that design implemented into this movie, I'd have like no problem with Venom. But Topher Grace just does not do it for me for Eddie Brock.
Yeah.
Like, that is a bad casting choice.
Yeah.
And I think he probably would agree. I love Topher Grace. I think he's really funny and actually a really cool dude. But yeah. But yeah, like, I like the stuff. Sandman, you mentioned.
Yeah.
Such a good villain. Like,
Good arc.
A Raimi villain, to its core. I've been reading a lot of Spider-Man comics in general. I think I've been mentioning that, but I recently read a small issue, and it was It was a Sandman annual, and it talks about his origin. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, I don't like this origin. I'm like, like I like the movie version of Sandman better than I do the comic
Sure.
version. And I mean, if people disagree with me, that's fine. I don't think many people know Sandman's origin. His real name's not even Flint Marko. He took Flint Marko, like that's a fake name. He's gone through different aliases and stuff. The Flint Marko in Spider-Man 3, I think, is a fantastic character. It ties into Peter's character very well. And the scenes with him, especially revolving around his daughter, are really good. And there's a scene, I believe, in the editor's cut, which I have watched, where he's like a sandcastle.
Yeah,
And,
that's the one I watched then.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's what I figured, because I remember you took a video, and I think I was like, yeah, that's the editor's cut. Yeah, he's like a sandcastle, and she's like approaches him, and I think she like sees the locket or something. Like he gives her back the locket or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't exactly remember, but and then Harry's arc. I mean, it's just, it can be, the love triangle thing can be a little goofy at times.
Yeah.
And James Franco's performance can be a little like, when he's kind of I don't even know how to describe it, like cocky Harry at the end, when he's like gets his memory back and he's like trying to bring Pete down and like the whole MJ stuff. That part I'm like, but like it still works for me. Like I still think is good. But I like it better when after they have that fight, and then obviously Harry comes back.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to mention this, but that when they team up, that New Goblin and Spider-Man in Spider-Man 3 walk so that the Avengers and all of Avengers Endgame, and even the first Avengers, could run. Like,
Yeah.
that was like the ultimate crossover, because we had never seen Spider-Man team up with anybody.
Another hero or any. Yeah.
Yeah, because like they just didn't exist.
Yeah.
And so seeing him and his best friend save MJ, and them tag teaming on Sandman and Venom, I'm like, man, like the grin on my face is so good.
Yeah, it's like when Peter was just pretty much hopeless. Like he's dead, And
when he comes to his apartment and he says like, she needs us, and he just says, get out.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful scene.
Yeah, it's that whole arc, the friendship, the dynamic between all of them. It's really great, and Sam did a great job of setting that up. The fact that, for 2 movies, Harry knew that his best friend was Spider-Man, and it's just like this whole, conflict where it's like your childhood best friend is who you think is the murderer of your father. He's also this like super powered hero, it's just a lot of things going on. And I actually like that he lost his memory temporarily, because it kind of gave you a chance to revisit what their friendship was like before they ended up, teaming up at the end. So the whole thing with Harry and Peter, there's a lot of goofy moments throughout the whole trilogy. I think with Harry too. I mean, there's every single movie that Sam Raimi did had a lot of goofy moments. Like,
and that's
there's a lot of cheesy lines and stuff like that. But every time it happens, I can't help but smile.
Right.
Because the time period that it came from, and that's just how movies were at that time. I believe that like the early 2000s were like some of the roughest times for like for scripts and films in general. There's a lot of cheese back then. So, but yeah. I mean, we can get into the whole, dancing down the sidewalk and all. It's so
club scene. Oh,
yeah,
God.
It's so funny.
You want to die.
The scene where like, Peter's just walking down the sideline and just like pointing his finger at women and all that stuff. That whole thing was happening, and my girl, fiance now, is she's been watching all of these films with me. It's been really cool because she's seen them at some point in time, but hasn't really revisited them in quite some time, so it's kind of fresh to her. And I remember we're like watching it, and I'm like, man, I cannot wait until she says something after the scene ends. And like it ends, and she just goes, I'm confused. And I'm just like, I was like, for most things in comic book movies, I can give you an explanation, like what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
That I honestly had nothing to tell her. I'm just like, yeah, you know,
That
we just
scene.
kind of live with this. Yeah. She's just like, what exactly just happened? And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't really know. Like, I don't know why it's in here.
Yeah. How
So
did she feel about after the jazz club scene? Because I honestly think that's even cringier. Like,
yeah,
it's awful.
she didn't like that. She really like, she felt like how we all feel, like Peter's being a jerk, you know?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think she really didn't like this film. Whereas
Yeah.
I just live with its flaws, and
Right.
it's just, it's got a charm to me. But I knew, like, while we're watching it, I'm like, she's not digging this one,
Yeah,
even though she
yeah.
loved the first two.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's just the way that majority of people feel, anyways. So it is what it is. But
Comparison, right? Like you're going up against two great Spider-Man movies, and then it's like Sony's like, well, haha, you
yeah,
made some good money on those. Let's throw in the black suit, and you can make Toby dance.
yeah,
and get him emo hair.
she got a lot of good laughs out of it, like at
Yeah.
the actual jokes, not the cringy stuff. Like
Right.
the whole scene when, pretty much, this is my favorite, J.K. Simmons performance as J. Jonah
Okay.
Jameson, because he's like,
Yeah.
he's got the heart issue or blood pressure issue.
Right. Yes.
And like, there's a lot of really good scenes with him in this, like for comedic purposes. The one where he's like, he's got to take his medicine and she's buzzing the desk every time he reaches for the wrong bottle, and he's just got to like stay calm at all times, because you're like,
Yeah.
here's this guy who's always angry, and now he's having to chill out because of his blood pressure. And then there's a scene at the end where J. Jonah Jameson is like watching the whole fight going on, and then the girl, he buys the girl's camera, and she's like, films extra. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of good stuff, and she enjoyed all of that stuff. So
Yeah, there's one moment, like there's a lot of small moments in this movie that I think people glance over because of all of the big like stinker moments,
Yeah.
specifically what we just mentioned. But like there's almost like immediately like scenes right after those that are like, oh, that was a good scene.
Yeah.
But, like you just came off of the heels of it being so full of camp.
yeah,
But there's one joke that I love, and it's like it's so underrated. It's with Mr. Dickovich, and
oh
he's like he's on the phone. He's like, oh, is the phone broken? He's like, oh no, I'm just trying to decide what to say. And he's just like, is it a woman? If it's a woman, you should say, you are a good woman. I am good man. And he just stands there and looks, and Peter just like he kind of like shakes his head like go on.
Yeah.
And he goes back to Dickovich, and he's like, you're like, dude, I love this guy.
Yeah.
Like, and he also gives like a really heartfelt apology about like you'll get your rent when you fix this damn dog.
yeah,
Which that scene cracks me up, even though it's like kind of intense. Like I love.
but even like his landlord still goes back, and he's like, he's a good kid or has a good heart, or
He says like he is good boy.
yeah,
He must be in some sort of trouble.
yep,
Yeah.
true.
But there's also smaller scenes, like after right before the dance montage when Eddie gets the staff position. So he like after he blows up Harry, which is
Yeah.
I mean, by the way, that fight is also really good.
Yeah,
But it's so intense. Like man, he bodies.
and he
Harry, man.
like intended to kill him basically.
Yeah. Like he throws a bomb at a station, and you don't see what happens. You
No.
assume Harry's dead. You're like,
For sure.
what? But then right after that, he sees the newspaper, and he's like, photo by Eddie Brock. Well, we don't know that it's a fake photo until he goes to the staff position thing. And that scene, while it has some funny lines of like, "You're trash, Brock,"
Yeah.
and but they don't seem cheesy. It's really like his whole look. Like his design looks really bad with the emo hair and like the jacket. Like I'm
Yeah.
just like, I can't believe that you're this bad boy right now.
And it's not even like, oh, he's cooler now. It's like people like, it's kind of weird how they set this up, because it's like, there's like people who are like, oh, he's so cool, like
Yeah.
that he's interacting with. Who's God? What is it
Betty?
Felicity or
Betty Brant.
the like receptionist at the Bugle?
Yeah, Betty Brant.
Okay, so like she's like all over him in the
Yeah.
film, And then so you're like, oh, they're like setting it up where he's like a badass now, he's got this
Yeah.
edge. But then at the same time he's walking down the street and like all the women are like laughing at him, and I'm like, which
Yeah.
one is it? Like, is he this cool dude now that he's got the symbiote, or
Yeah, it's so
it's
weird because even right before he goes to the newsstand, girls are like looking at him. They're like parting their hair and
yeah.
stuff, and you're like, okay, I'm so confused right
Yeah.
now. And I'm like, you don't like you looked better when you didn't have the black suit.
It's
Like
so
you
bad.
looked you looked so bad. But anyway, what I was saying was with the staff position thing, he has like this kind of, I'd say kind of a good scene with Eddie Brock, where like he actually confronts him about it. And if he had just like thrown the thing down and then left the office instead of just getting the staff position, I think it would have been much cooler. But
Yeah.
then the scene that I really, really love, that's actually one of my favorite scenes in the whole trilogy, is after the jazz club thing, like everything normalizes, right? You're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, like this isn't weird anymore. So he comes up to MJ and he says, hey, and the manager comes up and is like, can I help you, sir? And anyway, he gets kicked out and he starts fighting back.
Yeah.
Well, then MJ runs up and he like in his just anger,
Yeah.
like accidentally just backhands her, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh my god. And they're broken up at this point, which I never really registered. I just assumed that like I was like, oh yeah, they're together the whole movie, and I'm like, wait, no, she broke up with him like through Harry, but yeah, or
Yeah.
by Harry's orders. But then she looks at him. And she just goes, "Who are you?" And he
Yeah.
just like looks down at himself, and he's just like, "I don't know." And he runs out, and he hears the church bell, and that's when he takes off the suit. That scene right there, I'm like, "Damn, that is a good scene."
It's a very mature scene, because I remember as a kid, I was probably like a teenager when I was watching
Yeah.
this movie, but like I remember hating that scene when I was younger, because it's just, as you should be, everyone should be raised, and taught not really not to hit anyone, but especially not a woman.
Yeah.
And that one like hit me hard, where I was just like, it made me really dislike Peter, and I didn't understand, like, now looking at it, being older and wiser, I didn't look at it in the way that like, oh, this is just like, it's this character development, obviously. I was just like, man, I really dislike Spider-Man in this movie, and that was the way it was intended to be.
Exactly.
But I didn't understand that when I was younger. I was just like, I just want to see like my hero Spider-Man that I look up to, and I'm not getting to see him be that person. And I haven't got to see him be that person for the entire film. Mm-hmm. Now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, this is development, and this was like the deconstruction of this character was very important. Obviously, they planned on doing many more films after this. I think like they were talking up to 6 films. So you could, they had to build him up. Well, we're going to deconstruct this character, and then let's build him back up for the other films. But I didn't understand that when I was younger, and now I look at it and I'm, I really enjoy that scene. And like you said, those 2 simple lines, who are you? I don't know. Like, those are very impactful lines. So yeah, one of the best scenes in the film.
And it's a really good scene, because I know, and not to get like too personal or anything, and not that I've ever gone through something like this as Peter does, but there's been times in my life where I've legit just been like, man, like I ask myself, who am I? And I just go, I don't know. Like,
you kind of lose yourself sometimes.
Right. Like, and it happens to everybody. We all lose our identity, like what matters to us, and we get caught up in the darker things in life, frankly. Like, and therefore, we lose ourselves. And so that scene always there, like, it actually makes me kind of emotional, because I'm like, man, like, you can really take this, and it kind of helps motivate me in a way where, like, man, if I'm at a point where like that, like, I don't know, like, I need to do something to fix this, because as soon as he says that, he fixes, like, he goes and does something about it, and he makes reparations with Aunt May, and like he's like, I'm not ready, even though she gives him the ring, she's like, in time. And I'm like, man, God, that is a good scene. There's just, that's why the movie is an 8 out of 10 for me, because I think all of the greatness and just gold Spider-Man content personally brings it up for me. That, like, I can look past the cringy stuff, or like rewrite it in my head, basically, or I'm like, oh yeah, like I can make a few adjustments here to where like the jazz club scene or him going down the street or whatever, or his goofy looking outfit. Like,
Yeah.
I can get past that stuff, but like the dope action scenes, the really heartfelt moments with all of the characters who are characterized so well.
Yeah.
The humor, there's just like, I'd say this movie feels like the most action blockbustery
For sure.
of the whole trilogy. And maybe that's because that was at a time when I remembered it being the summer and me being super excited for May 2007.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I mean, while this movie definitely is the weakest of the three, there are some scenes in there that, you know, really make it great for me and make it stand out. And I mean, and it doesn't even, I mean, it does not touch Spider-Man 2 or even 1, but it does feel like a complete trilogy. And there's something I actually wanted to ask you about.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted your opinion, and I'll ask you yours before I say anything about mine.
Mm-hmm.
This is the only Spider-Man movie in the Raimi trilogy that doesn't have an ending swing sequence.
Yeah.
Do you like that or not?
Yeah, I don't really care. Like,
Okay.
I don't know. I thought for the first movie, I thought that the ending swing sequence was just like you kind of need it, but I don't really buy into this whole like, oh, the ending swing sequence needs to be amazing. Like, you got like the people who hate the MCU Spider-Man films, and they're just like, oh, it doesn't have a good ending, you know, swing sequence, and I'm just like, who really cares? And like, was the movie good or was it not good? Because that's all that matters to me.
Well,
so.
there's controversy about it, which is why I asked, because some people think it really, like, his final narration and kind of like what he learned, or like, you know, his final proclamation of like, I am Spider-Man sort of thing, and him having that really epic ending swinging sequence. Like the end of Spider-Man 1, it's just him swinging, but it's like, oh man, it hits, you know.
Yeah.
And then in Spider-Man 2, it's him swinging away to, you know, go stop a crime, right after a really beautiful scene with MJ.
Yeah.
I think I personally think the movie is fine without it, because I feel like it wraps up the trilogy.
Yeah.
In a way, even though it wasn't supposed to. However, I think would have been really good is after they dance, the movie ends not with an epic score or anything, but a somber version of Spider-Man's theme while he's swinging with MJ in his arms.
Yeah.
I think, and then it like, and they go into the sunset and it kind of fades, you know,
yeah.
to show, which I mean, the ending of the movie, like he dances with MJ and that's where the movie closes, and you know they're together, but I think I'm like, oh, a swinging scene with them together would like really hit, you know, and be like, hey, like this concludes it. But that's just like my fan idea of like what would fit the movie's tone, and it's like, no, not like this epic score of him swinging, but just like a very like soothing, soft like swinging scene, just like back in Spider-Man 1, to kind of show like, hey, they're repairing their relationship, they've made amends, and they're both mourning Harry, right? But the dance like scene works just as well, you know, and I like how that works a lot.
I think it works just because I feel like it does kind of keep in line with the tone and the overall message of the film. Just because the reason that I think like the big conflict in this story, I think, is that Peter's kind of forgotten who exactly is Spider-Man.
Right.
It's Peter Parker. Peter Parker is Spider-Man.
Yeah.
He separates them.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks of Spider-Man as just like, they love me. It's like, I'm an icon kind of thing, you know?
In fact, he didn't, like, you know, it's like weird. He like separated them in the wrong ways and blended them in the wrong ways.
Yeah.
Where he let his popularity of Spider-Man, his fame as Spider-Man, seep into Peter. And
he loved being Spider-Man more than being Peter Parker.
Right. Whereas the previous two movies, it was the other way around, where Peter Parker was injecting into Spider-Man.
Exactly.
Right?
That's who, you know, Spider-Man is Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. And he loses sight of that in this film and forgets to be Peter Parker. just Peter
Yeah.
Parker, you know.
Yeah.
So that's why I think the ending kind of works, because it's just him and Peter,
Mm-hmm.
like no
Yeah.
Spider-Man, nothing. It's just
Yeah.
I'm Peter. Like, who are
Man,
you?
that's good.
It's like, who are you? It's like, yeah, I understand. Like, you're Spider-Man. Like, who are you? Because
That's
he's not
true.
being Peter anymore. So
Yeah.
that's just the way
That's a
I
good
kind of
point.
find that it works. But at the same time, like, your idea is also really cool. So
Yeah.
that could
No,
work too.
I like that because, even with that, the last time we really see them as a couple, other than the very end of the movie, is the horrible, horrible dinner scene,
Yeah.
where he's about to propose, and man, Peter is so punchable in this scene,
Yeah.
where he's just like, he doesn't know that MJ just got fired from the Broadway performance, and he's talking all about himself because it's right after Spider-Man Day, and he kissed Gwen like an idiot,
Yeah. Then Gwen
which is
shows up, makes it even worse.
exactly, and then he's just like, when I'm up there like Spider-Man, like MJ's just like, can you just try to like feel how I feel?
Exactly.
And he's like, what? And I'm like, bro, you are way off course right now. That's the
For
last time
sure.
we see them act like a couple, and it's because he keeps on injecting the Spider-Man stuff into their relationship, and she's like, she understands that he's Spider-Man, but she's dating Peter
Peter.
Parker.
Exactly.
Like that's why she asked him with the kiss. She was like, who was that? Was that Spider-Man or was that Peter Parker? Because she
Yeah.
knew. She was like, oh, that was Peter and his ego, kissing Gwen. And
Yeah.
so in the end of the movie, it's just Peter and Gwen, truly Peter and Gwen, and they just embrace each other like
Peter
they've
and
just lost
MJ.
their friend. Sorry, MJ. Yeah, my bad. Yeah. So, I think you've convinced me on that, and I've always kind of liked the more, I guess, bittersweet, somber ending.
Me too.
But I'm hoping that this next installment in the Spider-Man saga of movies comes out December. We'll hopefully maybe have him swinging one last time, because man, that would be hype.
Yeah, for sure. All three of them.
Yeah.
Splitting off
Dude,
into their dimensions, or
I yeah, I need that. There was also a scene. It's towards the end, or two scenes specifically, with Sandman, his final conversation with Peter after the big battle, and they have a really, really good conversation. And he basically explains what happened.
yeah.
And there's one line, and I find myself using that a lot nowadays. Not even in a reference or whatever, but because I find it's a really good line in general. But I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just need you to understand, or I
For
just
sure.
want you to understand. And it's like he is seeking forgiveness, but like, or no, he's like he would like forgiveness, but he's not asking for it.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm just telling you what happened, and you can choose to forgive me or not, but I need
Yeah.
you to understand what happened. And then Peter does. He says, "I forgive you," and then
Beautiful.
Sandman goes away, and it is beautiful. And then right after that is when he goes and has his makes amends with Harry, and he's
They
like, "I'm
watch the
sorry,
sunrise together.
yeah, he's like, I never should have hurt you," and he says, "It doesn't matter. You're my friend." And
Yeah.
like even saying it right now, like it makes me a little weepy.
Yeah.
Because then Peter just replies, "My best friend," and then Harry dies, and man, Harry's death is brutal.
Yeah.
It hits hard. But both of those scenes back to back, you're like, it feels like everything has been resolved. Like, things were so tense throughout this movie. Like probably the most tense out of all three of them in terms of relationships. Like
For sure.
Peter and MJ's relationship, very tense. Even some tension between Peter and Aunt May, with the whole like conversation about him killing Sandman, or
Yep.
sorry, Spider-Man killing Sandman. But I like to think that she knows.
Yeah.
I like to think that almost in every version of Aunt May knows that Peter, at least at some point, figures out without him telling
For
her.
sure.
And then of course, especially between him and Harry, and then like it's all based like it's all based around this concept of revenge. That is the
Yeah.
core theme of this movie is revenge.
Yep.
And how it corrupts someone. Like that's what Aunt May says. It's just like it poisons us and
Mm-hmm.
consumes us until it takes us over. Peter is trying to get revenge on Sandman. Um,
Harry's trying to get
Sandman's
revenge
on Peter.
Yeah.
Even Eddie is trying to get revenge on Peter, and
Yeah.
like it's just this all of this sabotage, right?
Yeah.
Where people are, and it's just so much hate and tension between people. And by the end of the movie, you just feel like, oh man, that was sad, but like that final battle, you feel like it feels better because he's back in the red and blue suit, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, he's there to save MJ, and then Harry shows up. It's just that final third act. I love like that final battle is so well done, and it gets me hyped every time. It's also just really well choreographed.
Mm-hmm.
Like these movies never fail to entertain me in the action department. Like I mentioned, like
Yeah.
like the hand-to-hand combat, like it just feels big and bold and comic booky, and I love that.
Yeah. Even like in the very beginning of the film where Harry gets injured, the whole glider scene down the alley.
That is a
I'm
great
like, we
scene.
don't see like stuff like that in comic book movies so often, you know?
Yeah.
I'm like, that's very unique and fresh, like, you
Yeah.
know, way of shooting action. Not 90% of it CG, but but it's like it's definitely like just so unique. And Sam Raimi does that with every film. Like all the action scenes don't feel the same. Like it doesn't feel like something you've seen. He's constantly trying to one up it. Now I say that the train sequence in Spider-Man 2 is going to be the GOAT, like it's the greatest.
Absolutely.
And it
So good.
still is, like, to this day. Although we watched Dark Phoenix, and that has an amazing train sequence.
That
like
does.
I like Grayson and I owe Dark Phoenix a huge apology. You
Yeah.
know, we trashed on that movie, didn't watch it for like 3 years.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't come out for a while, but you know,
Yeah.
that movie had some really good stuff in it too. But yeah, that's unique action as well. But
Trains.
trains,
Put a
yeah,
train in your movie and
more
you'll likely
trains.
benefit.
Yeah. Nah, it's cool. It's something different. And yeah, I mean, Spider-Man 3, freaking still good.
Yeah, and also I think the last thing I gotta mention is I think Spider-Man 3 is one of the most expensive movies ever made, if I'm not mistaken, and it's because the CG in this movie is so good.
Yeah.
Like this Sandman scene when he becomes Sandman, which is
Oh, yeah.
also a very good scene with him trying to grab the locket, and
Yeah.
like it's metaphorical because it's like he wants to have Penny but he can't have her because he's stuck in this life of crime. Like
Yeah.
he's burdened by this life of crime that he doesn't want. He's burdened with these sand powers that he didn't want. He says at the end of the movie, like, I didn't want this, you know.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, Flip Marko is like at his core is a good guy, and he just like he says this. He's just like, I've just got bad luck, and it's
Yeah.
like, yeah. But the CG is very well done, and yeah, the scene between him and Harry, that fight scene, is so good. One of my favorite lines, and it was one of my favorite things as a kid because it references one of my favorite scenes from Spider-Man 1, which is when he's dodging the kind of the shuriken goblin bombs or whatever. Like in the first one, they're kind of like spinning, but in this one, they're more like boomerangs. They're like tracking him.
Yeah.
They explode or like will get stuck in him, but still like they're the same concept.
Yeah.
And I love when he like deploys them, and Peter just goes, "Man, I hate these things."
Yeah.
Like I'm like, that's a Spider-Man quip right there.
For
Like,
sure.
I love that. And as a kid, I laughed so hard because I was like, man, he referenced it because in Spider-Man 1.
Yeah, exactly.
My dad's like, yeah, shut up. But yeah, that's my little tangent with those things. And also, like, why are the goblin bombs so iconic now? Like, I'm thinking about it. Like, when it lands in Sandman's neck and it just slowly beeps, I was like, whoo! And then, man, that's why I'm saying, like, in Far From Home, or
it shows up.
No
Like,
Way Home,
just-
I see that bomb and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that's all it takes. Like
Yeah.
it's the iconic design, you know,
Yeah.
from Sam Raimi's films.
Yeah.
I genuinely hope that Marvel Studios reached out to Mark Webb and Sam Raimi. I'm sure Sam Raimi because he's already like in the MCU right now, but I hope that they got some sort of input on these characters in
Yes,
some way.
yes.
Otherwise, I'm going to be pretty disappointed.
Yeah, we've
Um,
talked a lot on past podcast episodes, and we will likely talk about in these coming episodes because next up is
for
the Amazing
sure.
Spider-Man. Is how much we love Sam Raimi and Mark Webb, and how much they understand the character of Spider-Man.
Yes.
In fact, I think there's an old clip, and maybe we can try to pull it out at some point if it's possible. I think we're talking about Mark Webb.
Yeah, I got that.
Yeah, and we can post that back on for people who don't know or didn't hear that, for any new followers. But talking about Mark Webb, understanding that. But we'll post that at a later date when we get back into our discussion on the next episode, which will be the Amazing Spider-Man. And I'm
I'm
very
excited.
excited.
Like
You've
I've
already watched
loved.
it.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I'm one of those people that forget how good the first Amazing Spider-Man movie is. Like a lot.
Yeah.
Like I love Sam Raimi. These are my favorite Spider-Man movies. But I'm excited to like get onto something new. You know, like a fresh look at Spider-Man. So yeah, the
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a
That's
good one.
coming.
I think there's gonna be a lot of us defending these movies.
Oh yeah. Oh, you get ready for Amazing Spider-Man 2, baby, because
Yeah.
I'm coming in fiery with my
Yeah.
passion.
Hot takes coming.
Yeah, I'll have massive hot takes.
Yeah.
I will guard that movie with my life to the
No,
grave.
it's
Um,
yeah, it's gonna be fun. I can't like the whole series is just gonna be awesome. Just
yeah,
there's so much to look forward to. If we do the Amazing Spider-Man movies, we're gonna still do Homecoming, Far From Home, possibly Venom. Got to do Into the Spider-Verse, and definitely gonna be talking about this Spider-Man PS4 character at some point in time. So we got a lot of good content coming over the next couple weeks.
yeah. I'm like, oh man, we're getting close to ending this, and I'm like, wait, no, we're not. We still
Nah.
have like at the bare minimum 3 movies. But
If
like,
anything,
even
we
more
got to
than
get back
that.
to work. Like we got to get busy because
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
Hey, I mean, you got your PS4, so you've been playing through Spider-Man again. I've been playing through Spider-Man again, and just reading a ton of Spider-Man comics lately.
yeah,
I'm in a Spider-Man phase right now. That's needless
Same.
to say. People have been making jokes lately, because back on my birthday, I got a text, and people were like, "I hope you get all the Star Wars and Spider-Man stuff you've ever dreamed of," and stuff like that. I'm like, thanks, I didn't, but thank you. And then like just reading the comics and everything has put me in such a phase. Like I was at a coffee shop yesterday reading it, and they were like, "I hope you enjoy Spider-Man," and I'm like, "Thanks, I will
Yeah.
enjoy it."
It's crazy. We've become like the Spider-Man people, and whenever somebody wants to talk about Spider-Man, they seek us out now, which is
Yeah.
great to be known as that. Like
I-
my buddy Will, who I think he listened to one of our last episodes on Spider-Man because he's now like in a Spider-Man mood, and he came into work today and he just immediately is like talking about Spider-Man because
Yeah.
I mean like everybody's hyped for this movie coming up, rightfully
Yeah.
so.
The amount of people that have come up to me talking, they're like, "Grayson, we have to talk about the trailer," and I'm like, "I know."
Yeah.
And I showed them like leaked photos and stuff, and they're like, "What?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's like this is my time to shine. I'm
Yeah.
finally cool again.
Yeah. For sure.
But yeah, anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for our Amazing Spider-Man review. Feel free to check out our previous episodes if you haven't listened to them or just want to give them a listen. Share with your friends if you're listening on Spotify, and if you're on Apple Podcasts, please give a rating. We'd really appreciate it. Share it with people on there too. The more the merrier, seriously. If people are excited and watching through these movies maybe for the first time or for the 100th time before No Way Home, join us on this journey, because I'm sure a lot of us are probably going through it in very high anticipation. I'm going to shout out our patrons, and then I'll wrap us up. So we've got Jess as our sponsor. She's not here, but we thank her very much. We've got Joseph. We've got Rick. We've got Caleb, Diego, Jacob, Jake, and Sam. Thank you guys all for supporting us on Patreon, and you can also go on there, patreon.com/comicblast, and help keep us accountable for putting out more content for you guys, because we enjoy doing it.
Heck yeah.
And we're all busy people, and the more incentive we have to do it, the more fun we have, and it feels less stressful. And we don't want stress to come up on this podcast. We want it to be enjoyable. So hopefully this has been pleasant to your ear holes. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode. That being said, Shazam!